long time ago, ancient masters discovered a different way of being with our experience. Not by changing what happens, but by changing how we relate to what happens. The peace you're seeking isn't somewhere else. It's available right here, hidden within this very moment. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The teachings we'll share tonight have been passed down through generations of monks and masters. They speak to something timeless in the human heart. Each story, each insight is like a door opening into stillness. You don't need to force anything or figure anything out. Simply listen and let the wisdom settle naturally. Everything you need for deep peace is already present. Your body knows how to relax. Your breath knows its own rhythm. These teachings will simply help you remember what's always been true. Relax. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. One of the deepest teachings in Zen Buddhism is about finding stillness not by stopping movement, but by discovering the quiet center that exists within all movement. This might sound strange at first. We often think peace requires everything to be completely still and silent. But Zen wisdom points to something different. Think of a spinning top. When it spins fast enough, it appears almost motionless at its center. The outer edges blur with speed, but the core remains steady. Or consider a wheel turning. The rim moves quickly, covering great distance. But the hub at the center stays perfectly still even as everything rotates around it. Your life is like this too. Things move and change constantly. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. Events happen. People come into your life and leave. The world keeps turning. And somewhere within all this movement, there's a center point that remains untouched. This understanding changes everything about how we approach peace. Most of us have been trying to stop the movement. We try to quiet our minds. We try to control our circumstances. We try to make everything hold still long enough for us to finally relax. But this approach creates more tension, not less. We're fighting against life itself. Zen Buddhism teaches us to find this center, not by stopping the wheel from turning, which is impossible, but by recognizing the stillness that's already here, right in the middle of everything. This stillness doesn't require perfect conditions. It's available right now, exactly as things are. In ancient times, there was a monk named Ryokan who lived in a small hut at the edge of a bamboo forest. Ryokan loved the bamboo. He would sit for hours watching the tall stalks bend and sway in the wind. The sound they made was like water flowing over stones, constant and ever-changing. Other monks thought this was a waste of time. They believed meditation should happen in perfect stillness, in quiet rooms with no distractions. But Ryokan saw something in the bamboo that the others missed. He saw a teaching about the nature of peace itself. One day, a young monk named Kenji came to visit. Kenji had traveled for 3 days to find Ryokan's hut. He was frustrated with his practice. He lived in a large monastery where everything was structured and controlled. The meditation hall was silent. Not a stillness, Kenji complained to Ryokan. Even in the quietest room, my mind won't settle. The masters say I'm not trying hard enough. They tell me to concentrate more, to push away distractions more firmly. But the harder I try, the worse it gets. I try so hard to be calm, but it doesn't work. Ryokan listened quietly. He saw the tension in Kenji's shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. The young monk was wound like a rope, pulled from both ends. "Come," Ryokan said simply. "Sit with me." He led Kenji to a spot at the edge of the bamboo grove. It was a windy day. The bamboo stalks swayed and bent, rustling loudly. The sound filled the air like rushing water, punctuated by the creaking of the stalks as they moved. Leaves scattered across the ground. Birds called from the branches. "This is too noisy for meditation," Kenji said, his frustration rising. "How can you practice here? At the monastery, we would never allow such distraction." "Sit," Ryokan said gently. "Just sit. Watch the bamboo." Kenji sat, but his mind protested. This was all wrong. Meditation required proper conditions. Silence. Control. Structure. How could anyone find peace in this chaos? But Ryokan seemed perfectly at ease. He sat with his back straight but not rigid, his hands resting naturally in his lap. His eyes were soft, taking in the moving bamboo without strain. His breathing was slow and deep. He looked more at peace than any of the masters at Kenji's strict monastery. Kenji tried to meditate. He closed his eyes and attempted to focus on his breath. But the sound of the bamboo kept pulling his attention. The wind rushed through. The stalks creaked and knocked against each other. It was impossible to ignore. "Don't close your eyes," Ryokan said quietly. "Watch the bamboo." Kenji opened his eyes. He watched, though he didn't understand why. The wind pushed hard, and the bamboo bent deeply, some stalks curving until they nearly touched the ground. Then the wind lessened, and they straightened again. Back and forth, bending and returning. The movement was constant, graceful, fluid. Kenji watched for a long time. At first, his mind kept judging. This is a distraction. I should be meditating properly. This isn't how it's supposed to be done. But gradually, something shifted. The constant movement of the bamboo became almost hypnotic. His breathing began to match the rhythm of the swaying stalks. They never stop moving, Kenji finally observed. The wind never stops blowing. How do they not break? How do they not get exhausted? "Look more carefully," Ryokan said. "Where is the bamboo rooted?" Kenji looked down. He had to lean forward to see past the moving stalks. There, beneath all the movement, beneath all the bending and swaying, the roots remained still in the ground. Fixed. Unmoving. The earth held them firmly. No matter how wild the wind blew, no matter how far the stalks bent, the roots stayed exactly where they were. They didn't try to fight the wind. They didn't try to hold the stalks perfectly upright. They simply remained anchored. "The roots don't move," Kenji said slowly. "Yes," Ryokan replied. "The bamboo can bend freely because it's rooted deeply. It doesn't resist the wind. It moves with it. But at its center, in its foundation, it remains still. This is what Zen Buddhism calls finding your root nature. Your true self, the awareness beneath all the movement of thoughts and feelings." Kenji sat quietly, watching the bamboo sway. Something was beginning to dawn in his understanding. "You're trying to stop the wind," Ryokan continued, his voice soft. You're trying to make your mind perfectly still, like the meditation hall is perfectly quiet. You're using all your strength to hold your mind rigid, like a tree trunk that refuses to bend. But this creates suffering. A rigid tree breaks in the storm. A bamboo that resists the wind snaps. He paused, letting Kenji absorb this. Your mind is like the bamboo stalks. It will move. Thoughts will come like wind. This is natural. This is what minds do. The question isn't how to stop the wind. The question is, where are your roots? Can you find the part of yourself that remains still even while thoughts move? Kenji felt something loosen in his chest. He had been fighting so hard, trying to force his mind into submission, treating every thought as an enemy to be defeated. Over the following days, Kenji stayed with Ryokan in the simple hut. They sat together in the bamboo grove each morning and evening. Ryokan didn't give many instructions. He simply sat, present and at ease, while Kenji gradually learned to do the same. Kenji stopped trying to force his mind into stillness. Instead, he began to notice something underneath his thoughts, something that didn't move even when his thoughts did. An awareness that remained constant even as his mental content changed constantly. Like the roots beneath the bamboo, it was always there, always steady. His thoughts still came like wind. Memories, plans, worries, judgments. They arose and passed away. But he found he could be like the bamboo, rooted in awareness, bending with thoughts but not broken by them, moving with life but grounded in something deeper. One morning, a strong storm came through. The wind howled. Rain fell in sheets. The bamboo bent so far that Kenji thought surely some stalks would snap. But they didn't. They moved with the storm, bending impossibly far, then springing back when the wind lessened. Kenji noticed that morning his mind was also stormy. Anxiety about returning to the monastery. Doubts about his practice. Fear that he would lose this newfound peace once he left Ryokan's hut. The thoughts came like the wind, strong and turbulent. But underneath them, he found he could remain rooted. The thoughts were weather passing through. Strong weather, yes, but just weather. And beneath the weather, the awareness remained untouched. Still, spacious, at peace. I always thought peace meant no movement, Kenji said that evening as they sat together. I thought I had to stop everything, control everything, make my mind like a frozen pond with no ripples at all. But that's not it at all, is it? No, Ryokan replied, a slight smile on his weathered face. Real stillness isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of rootedness. When you're deeply rooted, you can move freely without being disturbed. You can live fully, think freely, feel deeply, and none of it disturbs your essential peace. At the monastery, they're trying to become like stone, Kenji said. Unmoved. Unmoving. But bamboo is wiser than stone, isn't it? Stone breaks under pressure, Ryokan said. Bamboo bends and survives. Zen Buddhism teaches us to be like bamboo, not like stone. Flexible but rooted. Moving but centered. Alive but at peace. This teaching about stillness within movement is central to Zen Buddhism's wisdom. We spend so much energy trying to control circumstances, trying to make everything quiet and perfect so we can finally relax. But this creates tension. We're fighting against the nature of life, which is always in motion. Zen invites us to find peace not by stopping life's movement, but by discovering the unmoving awareness within ourselves that watches life unfold. This awareness is like the bamboo's roots. It's like the wheel's hub. It's the still point at the center of everything. When you find this stillness, you don't need perfect conditions anymore. You can be at peace in noise or quiet, in activity or rest, in change or stability, because peace isn't dependent on external conditions. It's rooted in your own nature. In a different region, there lived a potter named May who discovered this truth through her work. May had learned pottery from her grandmother, who had learned from her grandmother before that. The craft had been passed down through generations of their family. The wheel, the kiln, the clay, these were as familiar to May as her own hands. But familiarity didn't bring ease. May took great pride in her work, perhaps too much pride. She wanted every pot to be perfect. She would spend hours on a single piece, trying to control every detail. If the clay didn't behave exactly as she wished, she would become frustrated. If a pot cracked in the kiln, she would feel like a failure. If a bowl turned out slightly lopsided, she would crush it and start over rather than accept the flaw. Her hands were always tense. Her shoulders stayed tight. She would work until exhaustion took her, then lie awake at night thinking about the pots she needed to make, the orders she needed to fill, the perfection she needed to achieve. Her grandmother watched this struggle with quiet concern. The old woman still worked clay herself, though her hands were gnarled with age. Yet, despite her aged hands, her pots were beautiful. They had a quality that May's lacked, though May couldn't quite name what it was. One day, the grandmother invited May to work beside her at the wheel. It was morning, and light came through the workshop windows in long golden streams. The air smelled of wet clay and wood smoke from the kiln. She had orders to fill. She didn't have time to just watch. But something in her grandmother's voice made her agree. The old woman placed a lump of clay on the wheel. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She centered the clay with hands that seemed to know exactly how much pressure to apply. Then she began to spin the wheel, and her hands began to shape. "You hold the clay too tightly," the grandmother observed, though May hadn't touched anything yet. "Even when you're just watching, I can see it in your body. You're clenched, ready to fight. You approach the clay like it's an opponent." May felt her face flush. It was true. "I want it to be perfect," May replied. "I want it to turn out exactly as I intend. If I don't control it, how will I make anything good?" "Watch," the grandmother said again, more softly. The old woman's hands moved with the clay. She didn't grip it. She held it lightly, touching it with her fingertips, guiding it rather than forcing it. As the wheel turned, the clay began to rise. The form emerged naturally under her touch, a simple bowl taking shape without struggle. May noticed something remarkable. Her grandmother's hands were essentially still. They remained in one place while the wheels spun beneath them. The clay moved through her fingers, but her fingers didn't chase the clay. There was a stillness at the center of all that motion. "The clay has its own nature," the grandmother explained as she worked. "It wants to do certain things and doesn't want to do others. The wheel has its own momentum, its own rhythm. My hands have their own knowing from years of practice. I don't force these things to cooperate. I work with them. I find the center point where everything comes together naturally. She opened the bowl wider, her thumb pressing gently from inside while her fingers supported from outside. The clay responded, spreading and thinning exactly as she intended. But it didn't look like she was making it happen. It looked like the clay was choosing to move this way. "You see?" the grandmother said. "There's a still point at the center of all this movement. The wheel spins. The clay rises and falls. The shape changes. But my hands, right here at the center, they remain almost motionless. They're just present, just touching, just guiding. When you find that center, the pot forms itself. You're not making the pot so much as allowing it to become what it wants to become." The bowl was complete, simple, even, beautiful in its plainness. The grandmother cut it from the wheel with a wire and set it aside to dry. "Now you try," she said. May approached the wheel with her usual tension. She centered a lump of clay and began to work. But almost immediately, she felt the difference between her approach and her grandmother's. She was gripping, fighting, trying to impose her will on the clay. The clay wobbled. She pressed harder to correct it. It wobbled more. Her frustration rose. She could feel her jaw clenching, her shoulders rising toward her ears. "Stop," the grandmother said gently. "Feel what you're doing. You're at war with the clay. Who do you think will win this war?" May stopped the wheel. Her hands were shaking slightly from the tension. "Start again," the grandmother said. "But this time find the center first. Not the center of the clay, the center of yourself. Find the stillness inside you before you try to make anything." May took a breath. She closed her eyes for a moment. She felt for what Ryokan had called the root nature, that place of quiet beneath all the striving and effort. When she opened her eyes and placed her hands on the clay again, something was different. Her hands were softer. Her breathing was slower. She started the wheel and let the clay spin through her fingers rather than trying to grip it into submission. At first, her old habits pulled at her. The urge to force, to control, to make it perfect through sheer will. But each time she noticed this tension, she released it. She returned to the center, to the stillness. Slowly, a bowl began to form. It wasn't perfect. The rim was slightly uneven, but it had a quality that her other pots lacked. It looked alive somehow. It looked like it had been born rather than manufactured. "Better," the grandmother said. "You found the center for a moment. Now you just need to learn to stay there." Over the following weeks, May practiced this new way of working. Some days were easier than others. Some days she would fall back into fighting, into forcing, and she would produce stiff, lifeless pots. Other days she would find the center and beautiful things would emerge with surprising ease. Gradually, she began to understand what her grandmother meant. There was a point of balance, a still place right in the middle of the spinning clay where everything aligned. When she found this place, her hands knew what to do without her having to think about it. The clay responded naturally. The pot formed itself. It was like the bamboo grove. The clay spinning was like the bamboo swaying. and her hands at the center, barely moving, were like the roots holding steady underground. This is what Zen Buddhism teaches about all of life, her grandmother said one evening as they cleaned the workshop together. The sun was setting, painting the clay dust in the air with gold light. There's a still center within every action. When you find it, everything flows naturally. When you miss it, everything becomes a struggle. This is true for making pots. It's true for growing rice. It's true for raising children. It's true for living your life. May rinsed clay from her hands in a wooden bucket. The water turned milky white. I thought mastery meant perfect control, she said quietly. I thought if I just tried hard enough, I could force everything to turn out right. Perfect control is exhausting, the grandmother replied. And it produces stiff, dead things. Real mastery is learning to work with the nature of things rather than against it. Finding where you can be still while everything moves. This is what gives life to what you make. Over time, May learned to bring this understanding beyond pottery. She noticed she could find the same center while walking through the market, while preparing food, while speaking with neighbors. There was always a stillness available right in the middle of whatever was happening. On busy market days, surrounded by noise and crowds and people bargaining loudly, she would remember the potter's wheel. The surface was chaos, movement, noise. But she could rest in the center. She didn't need the market to be quiet. She just needed to find her own stillness within the activity. When difficult emotions arose, sadness or anger or worry, she applied the same wisdom. The emotion was like clay spinning on the wheel. Strong, moving, demanding attention. But she didn't have to be swept away by it. She could find the still point of awareness that watched the emotion without being the emotion. The feeling would move through, like clay moving through her fingers, and she could remain centered while it passed. Everything is always moving, her grandmother told her one day as they worked side by side, both throwing pots on their wheels, the wooden mechanisms spinning in rhythm. The world turns. Seasons change. People are born and die. We grow old. Nothing stays the same. This is the nature of life. Movement. Change. Flow. She paused, shaping the rim of a jar with practiced fingers. But awareness itself, the consciousness that experiences all this change, that remains constant, that's your true nature. That's what Zen Buddhism calls your original face, the self that was here before you were born and will be here after you die. Finding that stillness, that unchanging awareness, that's the real work. Everything else flows naturally once you've found it. May shaped another pot, her hands steady at the center of the spinning wheel. The clay rose between her fingers. She understood now. Peace wasn't about stopping the spinning. It wasn't about freezing everything in perfect stillness. It was about finding where she already was still, right in the middle of it all. Where she had always been still, if she had only known to look. This wisdom from Zen Buddhism can guide you right now as you rest. You don't need to stop your thoughts from moving. You don't need to force your mind into perfect stillness. You simply need to recognize the awareness that's already still, the part of you that watches thoughts come and go without being disturbed by them. Think of it this way. When you watch clouds moving across the sky itself doesn't move. The clouds drift and change shape, but the sky remains exactly where it is. Your thoughts are like those clouds. They move through the space of awareness. But the awareness itself, the sky of your mind, remains still. You've been trying to stop the clouds, trying to clear the sky completely. But this creates struggle. The clouds will come. Weather happens. The question is whether you can rest in the sky while the weather passes through. This is the gift of Zen Buddhism's teaching about stillness within movement. You don't have to wait for perfect conditions to be at peace. You don't have to control your mind or your circumstances. You just have to recognize what's already still, what's already at rest, what's already at peace right at the center of your being. Let your thoughts move if they want to move. Let them be like bamboo in the wind, bending and swaying. You are the roots, not the stalks. You are the ground that holds everything steady. The movements on the surface can't disturb what's anchored deep. Zen Buddhism teaches that this stillness is your true nature, not something you have to achieve or create, not something that requires effort or strain, just something you have to remember and return to. It's been here all along, waiting beneath the movement, waiting beneath the busy surface of your life, ready to welcome you home whenever you stop fighting long enough to notice it. This is the peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. It doesn't require the world to be quiet. It doesn't require your mind to be empty. It doesn't require anything to be different than it already is. It's the peace of recognizing your own still center, your own root nature, your own true self that has never been disturbed by anything. Another powerful teaching in Zen Buddhism is about the art of letting go, not abandoning things or not caring about anything, but holding everything lightly the way you might hold a butterfly. If you grip too tightly, you crush it. If you hold gently, it can rest in your palm, and when it's ready, it can fly away. Most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from how tightly we grip onto things. We hold on to how things should be. We hold on to what we want. We hold on to our expectations and our plans. We hold on to people and possessions and moments that are already passing. And this holding creates pain. Zen Buddhism teaches us a different way, a way of being fully present with life while remaining free, of loving deeply without clinging, of caring without grasping. There was once a tea master named Ikkyu who owned a tea bowl that had been in his family for 7 generations. It was a simple bowl, nothing fancy to look at. Clay-fired brown and smooth. The glaze had tiny cracks from age, like rivers on a map. But it had been used by his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather and by every tea master in his lineage since. When Ikkyu held this bowl, he held centuries of tradition. He loved this bowl deeply. He used it daily in his tea ceremonies. The feel of it in his hands was familiar as his own skin. The weight of it perfectly balanced. The slight roughness of the unglazed foot. The way tea pooled in its depths, steam rising in delicate wisps. These things brought him comfort and connection to all the teachers who had come before him. Sometimes, late at night, he would take the bowl from its silk wrapping and simply hold it. He would imagine his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's hands in the same place his hands now rested. He would think of all the students who had drunk from this bowl over the generations, all the tea ceremonies it had witnessed, all the seasons it had passed through. His students knew how much this bowl meant to him. They treated it with special care. They handled it with extra reverence. They understood it wasn't just a cup. It was history made tangible. One spring morning, a student named Tomoe came for her lesson. She was young, perhaps 17, nervous about everything. She had only been studying for a few months, and her hands still shook when she performed the ceremony. Other students moved with grace and confidence. Tomoe moved like someone afraid of breaking something, which, as it turned out, was a reasonable fear. The morning was beautiful. Light came through the paper walls in soft rectangles. Outside, cherry blossoms were beginning to fall. The air smelled of green tea and spring. Everything was peaceful. Ikkyu prepared the tea as he always did. His movements were slow, deliberate, practiced from decades of repetition. He whisked the tea until it was perfectly frothy. He wiped the bowl's rim with a cloth. He turned it so the most beautiful side faced Tomoe. Then he offered it to her with both hands. Tomoe received the bowl with shaking hands. She bowed. She lifted it, admiring it as she had been taught. She turned it clockwise, once, twice, showing respect for the front of the bowl. She brought it to her lips and drank. The tea was perfect. Hot, slightly bitter, perfectly balanced. She drank slowly, trying to do everything right. When she finished, she lowered the bowl to wipe the rim where her lips had touched. This was proper etiquette. Always clean where you drink before returning the bowl. But as she set it down on the mat to reach for the cloth, her sleeve caught the rim. Just barely. The fabric pulled. The bowl tipped. Everything seemed to happen very slowly and very fast at once. Tomoe reached for it, but her grab only made things worse. Her fingers knocked it further. The bowl fell to the mat and shattered. Not a clean break, but many pieces. Some large fragments. Some small shards. Some so tiny they turned to dust. The sound of breaking filled the quiet room. Tomoe's face went white. All the blood drained away. She stared at the broken pieces, horror spreading through her entire body. Her hands began to shake violently. 7 generations of history destroyed in an instant. By her clumsiness, her carelessness, her incompetence. "Master, I am so sorry," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "I've destroyed something precious, something irreplaceable. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know what to do." Tears filled her eyes. Her breath came in short gasps. She wanted to gather the pieces, but was afraid to touch anything else. She wanted to run from the room, but couldn't move. She wanted to disappear entirely. Ikkyu looked at the broken bowl. Pieces scattered across the mat. Some large, some tiny. The handle separated from the body. The smooth interior now in fragments. The centuries of use ended. He picked up one piece, turned it over in his palm. The glaze caught the light. "What have you destroyed?" he asked gently. "Your bowl." "Your family's bowl. 7 generations of tea masters used it, and I broke it." "No," Ikkyu said. "You broke a clay cup. That's all. Clay that came from earth and has now returned to smaller pieces of earth. Nothing has been destroyed. The form changed, that's all." Tomoe stared at him, confused. But it's irreplaceable. Your ancestors used it. My ancestors drank tea from it, yes. They held it as I held it. But the tea they drank is long gone. Their hands that held it are long gone. They themselves are long gone. The bowl outlasted them, and now the bowl is gone too. This is the nature of all things in this world. Everything changes. Everything breaks. Everything returns to what it came from. He set the piece down gently. The mistake isn't that you broke the bowl, Tomo. Breaking happens. Dropping happens. This is how the world works. The mistake would be for me to create suffering over something that already happened and cannot be changed. Or for you to torture yourself with guilt over an accident. Tomoe wiped her eyes. But didn't you love that bowl? I did love it. I still have love for what it was. But love and attachment are different things. I loved the bowl while it was here. I appreciated its presence. But I didn't need it to stay forever for my love to be real. And now that it's broken, my love doesn't turn to suffering because I can let it go. He began to gather the pieces, placing them carefully on a small tray. Everything we love will eventually leave us, one way or another. People die. Objects break. Moments end. The sun sets. Flowers wilt. Nothing stays. If we attach our peace to things staying the same, we doom ourselves to constant suffering. But if we can love fully while holding lightly, we can appreciate each moment without being crushed when it passes. Tomoe helped gather the smaller pieces. Her hands had stopped shaking. I thought letting go meant not caring about anything, she said quietly. I thought it meant becoming cold or distant. No, Ikkyu replied. That would be a different kind of suffering. We can care deeply, love fully, and engage completely with life. But without grasping, without demanding that things stay the same, without making our peace dependent on holding on to what's already slipping away. He poured tea for both of them, using a simple, everyday cup. The tea tasted the same as it always had. The morning light still came through the window. The cherry blossoms still bloomed outside. The bowl was gone, but the moment was still full. Receiving what comes with open hands, Ikkyu said. Appreciating it fully. And letting it go with open hands when it leaves. Nothing held so tightly that losing it destroys us. Tomoe drank her tea slowly. Something had shifted in her understanding. The weight of guilt began to lift. The bowl was broken, yes, but nothing essential had been destroyed. Life continued, full and complete, even without that particular form. What Ikkyu showed Tomoe that morning lives at the heart of Zen Buddhism. We can love without grasping. We can appreciate without clinging. We can hold things dear while knowing they won't last. This doesn't make love less real. It makes it more free. A merchant named Hiroshi learned this truth through years of struggle. Hiroshi was successful in his work. He had built a trading business over 30 years, starting with nothing but determination and a willingness to travel long distances. He bought goods in one village and sold them in another. Rice, cloth, tools, pottery. Over decades, he had built relationships with craftsmen and merchants across many regions. He earned enough to support his family well. His children wore good clothes. His wife never worried about food. They lived in a solid house with a good roof. He took great pride in what he had built. Perhaps too much pride. Perhaps too much fear of losing it. Success had become a weight he carried everywhere, heavier than any pack. He worried constantly about his business, about competitors who might undercut his prices, about changing trade routes that might bypass his village, about droughts that might reduce harvests, about floods that might ruin shipments, about the possibility of losing what he had worked so hard to gain. He would lie awake calculating profits, planning strategies, imagining disasters. Every night, the same worries circled through his mind like birds that wouldn't land. What if the silk merchant in the eastern village finds a better trader? What if the pottery from the western valley stops selling? What if? His success, instead of bringing peace, had brought endless anxiety. His wife noticed how he had changed over the years. How he barely slept anymore. How he would wake in darkness, sweating, his mind already racing through problems. How he couldn't enjoy a meal without thinking about business. How even when he was home, sitting right beside her, he wasn't truly present. His mind was always elsewhere, always worrying, always planning, always trying to control outcomes that hadn't happened yet. "You're carrying too much," she told him one evening. They sat together after dinner. Their children were asleep. The house was quiet. But Hiroshi's mind was loud. "You're going to break under the weight of it all." "I can't let go," Hiroshi replied, his voice tight. "If I stop worrying, if I stop planning, everything will fall apart. I have to hold it all together. I have to stay ahead of problems. I have to make sure nothing goes wrong." "And has all this worrying prevented things from going wrong?" she asked gently. Hiroshi had no answer. Because it hadn't. Things went wrong sometimes despite his worrying. And things went right sometimes despite his worrying. The worrying seemed to achieve nothing except exhaustion. But he didn't know how to stop. One season, Hiroshi traveled to a distant town to meet a merchant who owed him payment for goods delivered. The journey took 4 days on foot. He carried with him ledgers, contracts, samples of new fabrics he hoped to sell to other merchants along the way. His pack was heavy with all these things. Rolls of silk, bundles of paper tied with string, small clay jars of spices. But his mind was heavier still. He worried about bandits on the road. He worried about the weather delaying his return. He worried about what might go wrong at home while he was gone. He worried about whether the merchant would actually pay him or whether there would be excuses, delays, reasons to wait longer. Each step carried the weight of 1,000 concerns. The first 2 days of travel passed without incident. He walked through familiar territory, stopped at inns he knew, ate simple meals of rice and vegetables, slept poorly, his mind already in that distant town, already planning what he would say, how he would insist on payment, what he would do if payment was refused. On the 3rd day of travel, as he crossed through a mountain pass, the weather changed. Dark clouds gathered quickly. The wind picked up, cold and sharp. He pulled his cloak tighter and walked faster, hoping to reach shelter before the storm hit. But the storm came suddenly, as mountain storms do. One moment the clouds were still gathering. The next moment, rain fell in sheets. Not gentle rain, but hard, driving rain that stung his face and hands. Wind howled through the rocks like something alive. The path became slick with mud almost instantly. Hiroshi struggled forward, bent under the weight of his pack, fighting to keep his footing on the treacherous path. Water ran down his face. His clothes were soaked through. The pack grew heavier as the rain soaked into fabric and paper. But he pushed on, determined, trying to control the situation through sheer will. Then his foot slipped on a patch of mud. He felt himself falling, grabbed for a branch that wasn't there. His body hit the ground hard, and momentum carried him down a slope. He tumbled, rolled, bounced off rocks. His pack flew open. Papers scattered into the wind like white birds. Fabric samples tumbled into the mud. Small jars broke, spices mixing with rainwater and mud. He lay at the bottom of the slope, breathless and bruised. Above him, he could see his ledgers, carefully maintained for years, sitting in a puddle. The ink was already running, lines blurring into illegible smears. Numbers dissolving. Records disappearing. He watched his careful work dissolve in the rain. Everything he had carried, both in his pack and in his mind. Everything he had worried about protecting. All his careful planning and record-keeping. Gone in moments. Ruined by circumstances he couldn't control. And something strange happened. Instead of panic, he felt relief. A strange, unexpected lightness. The weight was gone. The burden had been lifted, not by his choice, but by circumstance. And he realized he could breathe more easily than he had in years. He began to laugh. Lying in the mud, rain pouring down, his business records ruined, he laughed like he hadn't laughed since he was a boy. A monk traveling the same path heard the laughter and came to help. He found Hiroshi sitting in the mud, still chuckling, making no effort to gather the scattered papers. "Are you injured?" the monk asked. "No," Hiroshi said. "I think I'm healed." The monk helped him to his feet and offered shelter in a small temple nearby. They sat by a fire, drying out, while Hiroshi explained what had happened. "I've been carrying this business like it would die if I stopped gripping it," Hiroshi said. "Every day, tighter and tighter. I thought if I let go even a little, everything would collapse. But just now, when it was taken from my hands, I felt free." "How strange is that?" "Not strange at all," the monk replied. "You confused caring for something with clutching it. A man who loves a bird can keep it in a cage, protecting it, controlling it, making sure nothing happens to it. But the bird suffers. Or he can love the bird by letting it fly, trusting it, allowing it to be what it is. The second man loves more truly." "But my business needs me," Hiroshi protested. "My family depends on it. I can't just stop caring." "Who said anything about stopping caring?" "Care deeply. Work diligently. But hold it all lightly. Your business will thrive or struggle whether you grip it with white knuckles or hold it with open hands. The difference is that with open hands, you can actually respond to what's needed. With clenched fists, you can only hold on." Hiroshi looked at his hands. They were red and raw from gripping his pack so tightly during the fall. He unclenched them slowly. The tension released. "My ledgers are ruined," he said. "I'll have to recreate everything from memory. Will you remember the important things?" The monk asked. "Yes," The debts owed, the goods delivered, the relationships built. Those I remember. Then you haven't lost anything essential. You've only lost papers. And you've gained something much more valuable. You've learned that you can survive losing what you thought you had to hold on to. Hiroshi stayed at the temple for 2 days while the storm passed. He watched the monks go about their work. They tended gardens, cooked meals, swept floors. They did everything with care and attention. But there was an ease to their movements. They weren't grasping at anything. They weren't white-knuckling their way through life. One monk worked in the garden, carefully tending vegetables. A rabbit came and ate several plants he had just watered. The monk simply watched, smiled, and continued his work. "Don't you want to chase it away?" Hiroshi asked. "The rabbit is hungry," the monk said. "I grow more than we need. Let him have some. What's mine to give isn't mine to clutch." When the storm cleared and Hiroshi prepared to continue his journey, he felt different. Lighter. Not because his pack was lighter, though he had left the ruined papers behind, but because something inside had loosened. Some grip had released. He reached the town and met with the merchant who owed him payment. But he found that the merchant had fallen on hard times. His shop had burned. He had nothing to pay with. The old Hiroshi would have been furious, would have demanded payment somehow, would have seen this as disaster piling on disaster. But something had changed. "I'm sorry," the merchant said, eyes downcast. "I know you traveled far. I know you were counting on this payment. I have nothing to give you." Hiroshi looked at the man's burned shop, at his worn clothes, at the defeat in his shoulders. He thought of the tea bowl that broke, of loving without grasping, of holding things lightly. "You owe me nothing," Hiroshi said. "The debt is forgiven. I hope your fortune improves." The merchant stared at him in disbelief. "But this was a large sum." "Your business." "My business will continue or it won't," Hiroshi said. "Either way, making you suffer more won't help anything. Go rebuild your shop. When you're successful again, help someone else the way I'm helping you now." On the journey home, Hiroshi's pack was even lighter. But his heart was lighter still. He had released something he had been carrying for years without even knowing it. The belief that he had to control everything. The belief that his peace depended on holding everything together perfectly. The belief that letting go meant losing everything. When he arrived home, his wife noticed immediately. "You look different," she said. "Younger somehow." "I lost my ledgers in a storm," Hiroshi told her. "And I forgave a large debt. By all measures, this trip was a disaster." "But you're smiling," she said. "Yes. I learned something more valuable than any payment. I learned that I can let go." Over the following months, Hiroshi rebuilt his records from memory. His business continued. Some ventures succeeded. Some failed. But he no longer clutched at any of it. He worked diligently, but held everything lightly. When opportunities came, he received them with open hands. When losses came, he let them go with open hands. His sleep improved. His meals tasted better. He was present with his family in ways he hadn't been in years. Not because he cared less about his work, but because he no longer confused caring with grasping. One evening, his young son asked him about business. "Father, how do you know what to hold on to and what to let go?" Hiroshi thought about the tea bowl that broke, about his ledgers dissolving in the rain, about the debt he had forgiven, about all the teachings of Zen Buddhism that pointed to the same truth. "Hold everything as if you're holding water," he said. "Cup your hands gently and the water stays. Clench your fists to keep it from escaping, and it slips right through your fingers. Life is like that. Hold it gently and you can carry it. Grasp too tightly and it's gone." His son nodded slowly, understanding something beyond his years. As you rest here tonight, you can practice this same letting go. Whatever you've been gripping tightly, you can release your hold. Whatever you've been trying to control, you can soften your grasp. Your breath comes and goes. You don't hold on to it. Each breath arrives, stays briefly, and departs. And this letting go doesn't diminish life. It allows life to flow naturally. Your thoughts come and go. You don't need to hold on to them or push them away. They can move through like water, like wind, like seasons changing. Even this moment is already passing. You can appreciate it fully right now, and then let it go as the next moment arrives. This is the peace of open hands, of loving without clinging, of living fully while holding lightly. Zen Buddhism teaches that peace exists only in one place, not in the past, which is already gone, not in the future, which hasn't arrived. Only here, only now, only in this present moment. This sounds simple, but most of us spend very little time in the present. We live in memory, replaying what happened. Or we live in anticipation, imagining what might happen. The actual moment we're in, the only moment that truly exists, often goes unnoticed while our minds wander elsewhere. There was a monastery where a young monk named Daichi was assigned to wash rice each morning before the other monks woke. It was his job for an entire year. Every dawn, while darkness still held the valley, he would walk to the kitchen, take out the large wooden bowl, measure the rice, and wash it under cold running water from the stream that ran beside the monastery. At first, Daichi hated this task. It seemed beneath him. He had come to the monastery to study profound teachings, to meditate on deep truths, to achieve enlightenment. He had read about great masters who had sudden awakenings. He imagined himself having deep realizations during meditation. Instead, he was stuck washing rice. Day after day, the same mindless chore. His hands would go numb in the cold water. His back would ache from bending over the bowl. His knees hurt from kneeling on the wooden floor. And his mind would wander everywhere except to the task at hand. He resented every moment of it. While his hands moved through the rice, his thoughts traveled far. He would think about the meditation session he was missing. He would imagine himself years from now, a great teacher giving wise instructions to devoted students. He would replay conversations from the day before, thinking of better things he could have said, more impressive things. He would plan what he would study later, which sutras he would read, how quickly he could advance through the teachings. He thought about everything except washing rice. The actual moment he was in, the only moment that existed, passed by completely unnoticed while his mind lived in fantasy and memory. The head cook, an old monk named Tenshin, would sometimes watch Daichi work. He never said anything. He just watched with quiet attention, his weathered face calm, then went about his own preparations for the morning meal. One morning, Daichi was especially distracted. He had stayed up late the night before reading sutras by candlelight, trying to understand complex philosophical concepts about emptiness and form, about the nature of consciousness, about the path to awakening. Important things. Meaningful things. Deep truths about reality. Not like this boring, repetitive, meaningless task of washing rice. His mind was so full of ideas, so busy with concepts, that he didn't notice what his hands were doing. He had been washing the same batch of rice for far too long, mechanically running his hands through it while his thoughts wandered through philosophy. The grains were breaking apart in his hands, turning to mush. He had completely ruined the rice for the morning meal. Tenshin appeared beside him without a sound. "What are you doing?" the old cook asked, his voice gentle but direct. "Washing rice," Daichi replied automatically, though clearly he had failed even at this simple task. The evidence of his failure floated in the bowl before him. "No," Tenshin said gently. "You're not washing rice. You're thinking about washing rice. You're thinking about sutras. You're thinking about enlightenment. You're thinking about being somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. But you're not actually washing rice. You've never washed rice, not once in the 3 months you've been here." Daichi looked down at the ruined rice in his hands. Broken grains. Cloudy water. He felt shame rising in his chest. "I don't understand. I know how to wash rice. It's simple." "Is it?" Tenshin asked. "You've been doing this every morning for 3 months. And look, you still don't know how. You know why? Because you've never actually done it. Your hands were here, but you were somewhere else. Your body was washing rice, but you were living in your thoughts, in your plans, in your imagination. You missed the only thing that was real. This moment. This bowl. This water. These hands." He scooped out fresh rice into the bowl and began to wash it himself. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent. He held each handful of rice with careful attention, feeling the grains between his fingers. He listened to the sound of water running over them. He watched how the water cleared as the starch washed away, becoming transparent. "This is Zen Buddhism," Tenshin said as he worked, his hands moving steadily through the rice. "Not in books. Not in sutras. Not in meditation halls. Not in your head. Right here. In this bowl. In this water. In these hands. This moment is the only moment you ever have. If you miss it while thinking about other moments, while living in your head, you miss your entire life." Daichi watched the old cook work. There was something different in how Tenshin moved. A quality he couldn't quite name. Completeness, maybe. Wholeness. He was entirely present with washing rice. Not thinking about it. Not analyzing it. Not judging it. Not wishing it was something else. Just doing it with full attention, as if nothing else in the world existed in that moment. "Try again," Tenshin said, stepping aside. "But this time, be here. Forget about sutras. Forget about enlightenment. Forget about being a great teacher someday. Forget about being somewhere else or someone else. Just be here, washing rice, in this moment. Nothing else exists. Just this. Daichi took a breath and began again. At first, his mind kept wandering. It was like trying to hold water. He would focus on the rice for a moment, then notice a thought and get carried away by it. A memory from childhood. A worry about whether he was doing well enough. A fantasy about the future. Each time, he would catch himself and pull his attention back. Notice another thought and return to the rice. Again and again, bringing himself back to this moment, this bowl, this water, these hands. It was exhausting at first. He had no idea how much energy he spent lost in thought until he tried to stay present. His mind resisted like a wild animal being tamed. It wanted to run everywhere except here. But gradually, something shifted. The gaps between thoughts grew longer. The present moment became more vivid. He felt the temperature of the water. Cold at first, shocking against his skin, then his hands adjusted and the coldness became just a sensation, neither good nor bad. He felt the texture of the grains. Smooth, hard, slightly slippery when wet. Each grain distinct in his fingers. He heard the sound of water running from the stream into the bowl. A constant flow, but with variations. Sometimes louder, sometimes softer, depending on how he moved his hands. He heard the sound of rice moving through his fingers. A gentle rustling, like wind through dry grass. He saw how the water gradually cleared. First milky white with starch, then becoming transparent as he worked. For the first time in 3 months, he was actually washing rice. Not thinking about it. Not judging it. Not wishing it was over. Not imagining himself doing something more important. Just doing it. Being fully present with it. Here. Now. Complete. And in that presence, something unexpected happened. The task wasn't boring anymore. It wasn't meaningless. It was full, rich, complete. Each moment held so much detail, so much sensation, so much life that he had been missing while his mind wandered elsewhere, lost in thoughts about the past and future. The rice grains felt alive in his hands. The water felt like liquid light. His own breath became noticeable, steady, and calm. Everything was vivid, immediate, real, in a way it had never been before. When he finished, the rice was perfect. Clean, but not damaged. Ready for the morning meal. And Daichi felt different. More settled. More here. More real. As if he had been living in a dream and had just woken up. This is what we practice, Tenshin said, watching him with approval. Being fully present with whatever we're doing. When you wash rice, wash rice. When you sit in meditation, sit in meditation. When you walk, walk. When you eat, eat. Not half-heartedly. Not while thinking about other things. But completely, with your whole attention. This is Zen Buddhism. This simple presence. Over the following months, Daichi practiced this with washing rice and with everything else. He began to notice how often his mind left the present moment. How often he was physically in one place, but mentally somewhere else. Walking to the meditation hall but thinking about breakfast. Eating breakfast but thinking about work. Working but thinking about rest. Resting but thinking about work. He saw how he had been living his entire life one step removed from reality. Always in his head. never quite here. And gradually, he learned to return, to come back to now, to be where he actually was instead of lost in thought. This practice changed everything. When he meditated, he actually meditated instead of thinking about meditating or judging his meditation. When he studied, he was fully present with the text instead of reading while thinking about other things, the words passing through his eyes but never really landing. When he worked in the garden, he felt the soil in his hands, smelled the earth, heard the birds. When he ate, he tasted his food, really tasted it, as if for the first time. Life became richer, not because anything external changed. The monastery was the same. His duties were the same. The rice was the same. But he was actually present for his life now, instead of constantly living in his head, in the past, in the future, anywhere but here. The year of washing rice ended, and Daichi was given new duties. But he never forgot what Tenshin had taught him. That presence is everything. That this moment is all we ever have. That real life happens here and now, not in our thoughts about life. This is what Zen Buddhism points us toward. The present moment is the only moment that exists. Everything else is memory or imagination. And while both memory and imagination have their place, we miss our actual life when we spend all our time there. There was a woodcutter named Jiro who learned this same truth through years of struggle with his own mind. Jiro cut wood for his village. He had done this work since he was a boy of 12, learning from his father, who had learned from his father before him. 3 generations of woodcutters. The work was hard but simple. Walk into the forest before dawn. Choose a tree. Cut it down. Split the wood. Carry it back to the village on his back. Sell it. Return the next day. Day after day, season after season, year after year, the same rhythm, but Jiro was never at peace with this rhythm. His body would be in the forest, but his mind was always somewhere else. Always restless. Always dissatisfied. Always looking for something other than what was happening right now. He would swing his axe while thinking about an argument he had with his wife that morning. She had asked him to repair the fence, and he had snapped at her, saying he had no time, he had work to do. Now he replayed the argument in his mind, thinking of what he should have said, feeling angry all over again. The past was gone, but he carried it with him into the forest like extra weight. He would split wood while worrying about whether he had cut enough for winter. What if it was a harsh winter? What if he got sick and couldn't work? What if his children needed more? His mind spun with worries about a future that hadn't happened yet, creating suffering about problems that didn't exist. His work suffered from all this. He would miss his mark with the axe because he wasn't paying attention to the tree, wasn't present with the swing. He would cut too much or too little because he couldn't focus on what he was actually doing. He would stumble on the path back to the village because his mind was elsewhere and his feet didn't know where they were stepping. He knew something was wrong. He knew he wasn't living right, but he didn't know how to change it. His mind seemed to have its own will, running wherever it wanted, and he had no ability to stop it. One day, deep in the forest, farther than he usually went, he encountered an old hermit who lived in a small hut among the trees. Jiro had heard stories about this hermit, but had never met him. Some said he was a monk who had left his monastery. Some said he had once been wealthy, but had given everything away. No one knew for sure. He simply lived alone in the forest, bothering no one. The hermit was sitting outside his hut when Jiro passed by, carrying a heavy load of wood on his back. The old man was doing nothing in particular, just sitting on a simple wooden bench. Present. Still. His face calm, his hands resting in his lap. Not fidgeting, not busy, not lost in thought. Just there. "You look troubled," the hermit said as Jiro passed, his voice gentle, like wind through pine needles. "I'm fine," Jiro replied automatically, though clearly he wasn't. His face was tight with tension. His shoulders were hunched not just from the weight of the wood, but from the weight of everything he carried in his mind. Your body walks one direction. Your mind walks another. This is why you're tired. This is why you suffer. Jiro stopped in his tracks. How did this old man know? He had never met him before. How could he see what Jiro himself had only barely recognized? "I don't know how to change it," Jiro admitted, setting down his load. The words came out before he could stop them. "My mind won't stay still. It jumps everywhere like a monkey. While I work, I think about home. While I'm home, I think about work. I think about what happened years ago. I think about what might happen tomorrow. I'm never where I am. I don't know how to stop it." "Sit," the hermit said, gesturing to a spot beside him on the bench. "Just for a moment. Rest." Jiro looked at the Sunday. He had more work to do. He should get back. But something in the old man's voice made him sit down. The hermit said nothing for a while. They just sat together in the forest. Birds called from the branches. Wind moved through leaves, making them whisper. Sunlight filtered down through the canopy in dusty beams, illuminating small insects floating in the air. The creek down the slope made its constant music over stones. "What do you hear?" the hermit finally asked. Jiro listened. "Birds," he said. "Wind. The creek down the slope. Insects, buzzing. Do you hear your argument from this morning?" Jiro paused, understanding what the old man was pointing to. "No. That's in my head. That's not real sound." "Do you hear your worry about winter?" "No. That's also in my head. It's not actually happening." "So what's real right now? The birds you can actually hear? Or the argument you keep replaying that ended hours ago?" Jiro thought about this. The answer was obvious, but he had never really seen it before. The birds are real. They're happening now. The argument is over. It's not happening anymore. It's just in my memory. "Yes. But which one do you spend more time with? The real birds that are singing right now? Or the memory of the argument that's finished?" Jiro realized with a shock that he spent almost no time with what was actually real. He lived almost entirely in thoughts about the past and future. The present moment, which was the only moment that actually existed, the only moment that was real, passed him by completely. He was never here. Never now. Always somewhere else in time, somewhere that didn't exist except in his mind. "How do I change this?" he asked, and there was desperation in his voice. "How do I stop my mind from running everywhere?" "You're doing it right now," the hermit said. "You're here. You're listening to birds. You're feeling the bench beneath you. You're breathing. You're present. This is all. This is everything. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to achieve anything. You just need to be where you are. But I can't sit in the forest all day. I have work to do. I have a family to feed. I can't just stop working and sit here. Then do your work. But be present while you do it. When you swing your axe, just swing. Feel the weight of it in your hands. Feel your muscles working. Hear the sound of blade meeting wood. See the chips flying. Don't swing while thinking about home. Don't swing while worrying about winter. Don't swing while replaying old arguments. Just swing. The axe knows how to cut wood. Your body knows how to work. You just need to be present with it. You just need to be here while you're here. It sounded too simple. But Jiro had tried everything else. He thanked the hermit and continued home, his mind turning over what he had heard. The next morning, he returned to the forest to cut wood. But this time, he tried something different. Something he had never tried in all his years of work. When he chose a tree, he really looked at it. He saw its bark, its shape, the way its branches reached toward light. When he positioned himself to swing, he felt his feet on the ground, felt how his body balanced. When he swung his axe, he paid attention to the swing itself. The weight of the tool lifting back. The arc through the air. The moment of impact. The vibration up his arms. The sound. The feeling. His mind immediately tried to wander. Old habits. Thoughts about his wife, about money, about a dozen other things. But when he noticed his mind wandering, he brought his attention back. Gently, without judgment, back to the axe, to the tree, to this moment, to now. It was harder than he expected. His mind was like an untrained horse, constantly running off in different directions. But each time it ran, he gently brought it back. To the axe, to the tree, to his breath, to the sound of wood splitting, to now. And he began to notice something remarkable. When he was fully present, when he was actually here instead of lost in thought, the work was easier. His strikes were more accurate because he was paying attention to what he was doing. His movements were more efficient because he wasn't fighting with his thoughts while also trying to work. He wasn't wasting energy on two things at once. He was just working. More than that, the work itself became different. Not boring or tedious like it had felt when his mind was elsewhere, when he was just enduring it while thinking about other things. But full, alive, real. Each swing of the axe was complete in itself. Each moment held everything he needed. There was a satisfaction in feeling the blade bite into wood, in seeing the tree respond, in being fully present with the work of his hands. By midday, he had cut more wood than usual, but he felt less exhausted. His body was tired from work, yes. Muscles aching, sweat on his brow, the good tired of honest labor. But his mind was clear, light. He wasn't carrying the extra weight of 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 worries, 1,000 regrets. He visited the hermit again the next day. "It's working," he said, his voice filled with something like wonder. "When I'm present, everything changes. The work is the same, but it's different somehow." "Not easier," the hermit corrected gently. "Just more real. You're experiencing your actual life instead of the story about your life that runs constantly in your head. The story of what should be different, what used to be, what might be. Now you're living what actually is. Over the following weeks and months, Jiro brought this presence into everything. It became a practice, something he remembered and returned to throughout each day. When he walked through the forest, he felt each step, the ground beneath his feet, the air on his face, the scent of pine and earth. He noticed he had walked this path 1,000 times, but had never really felt it, never really experienced it, because his mind had always been somewhere else. When he returned home in the evening, he practiced being actually there with his wife instead of still thinking about work, still lost in the forest in his mind. He looked at her face and really saw her, maybe for the first time in years. He listened when she spoke instead of half listening while thinking about other things. She noticed the change in him. She softened toward him in ways she hadn't in years. "You're different," she said one evening. "I don't know what happened, but you're here now. You're actually here." When he ate his evening meal, he tasted his food. Really tasted it. The simple rice and vegetables his wife prepared became interesting, full of flavor and texture he had never noticed before when he ate while lost in thought. He saw the colors on his plate, felt the weight of the bowl in his hands, experienced the simple act of eating as if for the first time. When he lay down to sleep, he felt the mat beneath him, felt his body relaxing, felt his breath slowing. Instead of churning through worries and plans, instead of running through the day's conversations and tomorrow's tasks, he simply rested. And sleep came more easily, deeper, more restful. His relationship with his wife improved in ways that surprised them both. Not because their circumstances changed. They still had the same small house, the same simple life, the same daily struggles. But he was finally present with her. She felt seen and heard in ways she hadn't in years. Arguments that used to escalate now resolved more easily because he was actually listening instead of defending, actually present instead of planning his next words while she was still speaking. His work improved. Not because he worked harder or longer, but because he worked with full attention. Present with each task instead of scattered across 1,000 thoughts. The quality of his wood cutting improved. He made fewer mistakes, wasted less effort, found a rhythm that was almost meditative. His peace improved. Not because his life became easier or his problems disappeared, but because he stopped living in the painful past and the anxious future. He lived in the only moment that was real. This one, right now, where problems are usually much smaller than the stories we tell about them. Years later, people in his village would notice how Jiro moved through life differently than most. How he seemed peaceful despite hard work and simple circumstances. How he seemed present in a way that made others feel truly seen when they spoke with him. Some would ask him his secret. He would tell them about the hermit in the forest, about washing rice with full attention, about being where you are instead of where you wish you were, or where you used to be, or where you're afraid you'll end up. You don't need to think about yesterday. It's already gone. You don't need to plan tomorrow. It hasn't arrived yet. You can simply be here, breathing, resting, present. Feel where your body touches what supports you. This is real. This is now. Feel your breath moving. This is real. This is now. Hear whatever sounds are present. This is real. This is now. Your mind may wander to other times and places. This is natural. When you notice, you can gently return. Back to now. Back to breath. Back to this moment. This is all you ever need to do. Return to now. Return to here. Return to this breath. This is the practice. This is the peace. This is Zen Buddhism pointing you home to the only moment that exists. One of the wisest teachings in Zen Buddhism is about working with life rather than against it. Like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance. Like a tree bending in wind rather than breaking. There's a natural flow to things, a way that life wants to move, and our suffering often comes from fighting against this flow instead of moving with it. We spend so much energy trying to force outcomes, trying to make things happen on our schedule, in our way, according to our plans. But life has its own rhythm, its own timing, its own direction. And when we learn to sense this flow and move with it, everything becomes easier. There was a monk named Kensho who lived at a monastery built into a hillside near a river. Every day, twice a day, he would walk down the steep path to the river to fetch water for the monastery. Morning and evening, carrying empty buckets down and full buckets up. It was one of his assigned duties, and he had been doing it for 2 years. The path to the river had many stones. Some large as a man's head, some small as a fist, placed irregularly by nature and time and weather. They jutted up through the dirt at odd angles. Some were loose. Some were firmly embedded. The path wound around trees and over roots, and the stones made it treacherous, especially in early morning darkness or evening twilight. Kensho hated these stones. They were his daily enemy. He would trip over them in the dim morning light, his toes catching on edges he couldn't see. He would stub his feet against them, sharp pain shooting up his leg. He would twist his ankle on the loose ones. He would curse them under his breath, angry at nature for placing obstacles in his path, angry at the monastery for not improving the trail, angry at his own clumsiness. Every day, the same frustration, the same battle with the path. He would descend in irritation and ascend in exhaustion, fighting with stones all the way. He complained to other monks, "Why don't we improve this path? Why don't we remove these stones, or at least mark them clearly? It's dangerous. It's poorly maintained. Someone should do something about it." The older monks would smile and say nothing. They walked the same path with their own buckets and seemed unbothered by the stones. One morning, Kensho arrived at the river, especially angry. He had tripped twice on the way down. Once badly, catching himself with his hands, scraping his palms raw on gravel. His toe was bleeding from where he had kicked a stone he hadn't seen in the shadows. The bucket felt heavy in his hands, even though it was still empty. His breathing was hard and fast. Everything felt wrong. Everything felt like an attack. He stood at the river's edge, his jaw tight with irritation, his body tense with resistance, trying to calm himself enough to fill the buckets without spilling water everywhere in his agitation. That's when he noticed something he had seen 1,000 times but never really observed. The river was flowing around stones. Large stones, some as big as his torso, some even larger, sat directly in the current. Boulder-sized obstacles that had probably been there for centuries. But the water didn't fight with them, didn't try to move them. didn't waste energy pushing against them, didn't wish they weren't there. The water simply flowed around them, over them when possible, between them when available, finding every gap, every opening, every possible path forward. Where the stone was immovable, the water divided and rejoined on the other side. Where there was space, the water filled it. The current never stopped, never struggled, never got frustrated, never complained about obstacles. It just kept moving, adapting instant by instant to whatever appeared, always finding a way forward. The water had no preference about which path it took. It wasn't attached to going straight. It didn't have a plan about the correct route. It simply responded to what was there and flowed accordingly. When blocked, it turned. When the way opened, it moved forward. Completely adaptive, completely responsive, completely at peace with whatever terrain it encountered. Kensho stood there watching this for a long time. The morning light strengthened around him. Birds began their dawn songs. The river continued its eternal teaching, flowing around obstacles, demonstrating perfect acceptance and perfect adaptation simultaneously. The river had been teaching this lesson every single day, twice a day, every time he came for water. But he had been too busy fighting with stones to notice. Too caught up in his own resistance to see the wisdom flowing right in front of him. When he walked back up the path, buckets now full and heavy, he tried something different. Instead of fighting with the stones, resisting their placement, cursing their existence, wishing the path was smooth and easy, he moved like water. He flowed around them, stepped over them where possible, found the spaces between them. When the path zigged unexpectedly, he zigged. When it zagged, he zagged. He worked with what was actually there instead of demanding it be different than it was. His foot still hurt where he had stubbed it. His palms still stung from his earlier fall. But his mind was different. The path was the same. The stones hadn't moved. Not a single one. But his relationship with them changed completely. The walk became easier. Not because anything external changed, but because he stopped fighting. Stopped wishing. Stopped demanding. Started accepting and adapting. He began to notice this pattern everywhere in his life. How much energy he spent resisting what already was. Wishing the weather was different when rain came during work periods. Wishing his duties were different, wanting to study instead of fetch water. Wishing other monks would behave differently, would be quieter, would be more serious, would be less serious. Wishing the monastery had more resources, better food, softer sleeping mats. Wishing his meditation was deeper. Wishing his life was other than it was. All this wishing, all this resistance, was like trying to make the river flow uphill. Exhausting and completely futile. He was spending more energy fighting with reality than he spent actually dealing with reality. Over time, Kensho learned to ask a different question when facing obstacles. Not, how can I make this different? Or, why is this in my way? But, how can I work with this as it is? What is the path that's actually available right now, not the path I wish was available? When it rained during work period, he didn't curse the rain or huddle inside, resenting the weather. He noticed what work could happen in the rain and did that. Weeding, washing tools, tasks that rain didn't prevent and sometimes even helped. When a task took longer than expected, He didn't fight the timing or berate himself for slowness. He accepted the pace it required and adjusted his other plans accordingly. When another monk was difficult, sharp-tongued or lazy or disruptive, he didn't try to change the monk or avoid him entirely. He found ways to work around the difficulty, like water flowing around a stone, maintaining his own peace while adapting to the reality of the situation. This wasn't passive acceptance of everything. It wasn't giving up or not caring or becoming a doormat. It was intelligent adaptation. It was recognizing what could be changed and what couldn't, and not wasting precious energy fighting with what couldn't be changed. It was focusing his effort where effort could be effective instead of spreading it uselessly across everything that frustrated him. The abbot of the monastery noticed the change in Kensho, how he moved through life with less friction, how obstacles that used to frustrate him no longer disturbed his peace. One day, the abbot asked him about it. "I learned from the river," Kensho said. "Water doesn't fight with stones. It flows around them. I was spending all my energy fighting with the stones in my life. Now I flow around them. The stones are still there, but they don't stop me anymore." "This is Zen Buddhism," the abbot said. "Working with what is, not with what we wish was. Dancing with reality, not fighting with it. Finding the natural path instead of forcing an unnatural one." Kensho continued his daily walks to the river. The path never changed. The stones remained. But he moved over them now like water, like wind, like anything that knows how to adapt and flow. And in this flowing, he found a peace that resistance had never given him. This teaching about natural flow appears throughout Zen Buddhism. Life is always changing. Circumstances are always shifting. Nothing stays the same. We can exhaust ourselves fighting against this constant change, or we can learn to move with it, to adapt, to flow. A gardener named Hana learned this same wisdom through the seasons and through years of struggling against nature. Hana had a small garden behind her house where she grew vegetables for her family. She had started it when her first child was born, wanting to provide healthy food from her own hands. She loved her garden deeply, perhaps too much, with the kind of love that becomes attachment and expectation. She spent hours planning it each winter, drawing diagrams, reading about techniques, calculating yields. She would plan exactly which vegetables to plant where, how many of each, when they would be ready. She imagined the perfect summer harvest before spring even arrived. Perfect tomatoes, large and red and abundant. Perfect squash, growing exactly on schedule. Perfect beans climbing the stakes she prepared. Everything growing exactly as she envisioned it in her mind. But gardens don't follow human plans. They follow their own nature, their own timing, their own response to sun and rain and soil and season and insects and disease and 1,000 factors beyond human control. One year, excited for an early harvest, she planted tomatoes as soon as the calendar said it was safe. She wanted them early so she could enjoy them longer. But that year, a late frost came unexpectedly. The weather had been warm, then suddenly turned cold overnight. She woke to find her young tomato plants blackened and wilted, killed by frost while she slept. She stood in her garden crying. All that planning, all that careful work, all those seedlings she had tended from seeds gone in one night. She felt betrayed by the weather, betrayed by nature, betrayed by her own hopes. She replanted, but her schedule was disrupted. Everything was behind. Late tomatoes. Late everything. She spent the whole season frustrated, trying to force the garden to catch up to her original timeline, checking the plants constantly, measuring their growth against where they should be, always disappointed that they weren't further along. The harvest that year was actually quite good. The late-planted tomatoes grew well once established, but she couldn't enjoy it. She was too busy being disappointed that it hadn't happened on her schedule, in her way, according to her perfect plan. The tomatoes tasted fine, but they tasted like failure to her because they weren't early tomatoes. The next spring, she planted again with even more careful plans. She studied frost dates. She waited until she was absolutely sure it was safe. She prepared the soil perfectly. She did everything right according to all the knowledge she had gathered. But that summer brought drought. Week after week without rain. The sky stayed blue and cloudless. The soil dried and cracked. She watered constantly, hauling buckets from the well until her back ached and her hands blistered. Every morning and evening, carrying water. The plants survived her efforts, but many were stunted. The harvest was smaller than she had hoped. Some plants never really recovered from the dry period. Again, she spent the season fighting with reality, wishing for rain that didn't come, angry at weather she couldn't control, exhausted from trying to compensate for what nature wasn't providing. Her neighbor was an old woman named Yuki, who also kept a garden. Yuki's plot was smaller, less ambitious. She grew fewer varieties, made simpler plans. But Yuki always seemed peaceful with whatever her garden produced. Good year or bad, abundant or scarce, Yuki smiled the same, worked steadily, seemed content with whatever came. One day, after a particularly difficult morning of fighting with plants that wouldn't cooperate, beans that wouldn't climb, squash that wouldn't set fruit, Hana found herself standing at the edge of Yuki's garden. The old woman was working peacefully, thinning carrots, humming quietly to herself. "How do you stay so peaceful?" Hana asked, her voice carrying all her frustration. "Don't you get angry when things don't grow as planned? Don't you feel disappointed?" Yuki straightened slowly, her old back creaking. She smiled at Hana with gentle understanding. "I stopped making plans the garden couldn't keep. I work with each season as it comes, not with the season I wish was here." "But how do you know what to plant? How do you prepare? Don't you plan at all?" "I plan, yes, but lightly. I plant what makes sense for this soil, this light, this place. Things that grow well here without too much struggle. Then I watch what happens. I adapt as the season shows me what it's bringing. When the season is wet, I plant things that like wet soil or I move things to higher ground. When the season is dry, I accept smaller yields or focus on plants that tolerate drought. When frost comes late, I wait for the soil to warm. When it comes early in fall, I protect what can be protected and let go of what can't. I work with what is, not with what I wish was." "But don't you want a good harvest?" Hana asked. It seemed like Yuki wasn't even trying. "Of course I want a good harvest. But I've learned that fighting with the season doesn't make it better. A dry summer doesn't become wet because I'm angry about it. A late frost doesn't reverse because I'm disappointed. These things are what they are. So I adapt. I flow with the conditions instead of demanding the conditions flow with me. I work skillfully with what is instead of exhausting myself wishing for what isn't. She returned to her carrots, her weathered hands moving gently through the soil. When I was younger, Yuki continued, I was like you. Every season was a battle. Every problem was an enemy. Every difficulty made me angry. I fought so hard, and I was miserable. Then, one year, after a particularly bad harvest, I was sitting in my garden crying, and I realized the garden wasn't making me miserable. I was making myself miserable by demanding it be something it wasn't. The garden was just being a garden, responding to sun and rain and soil as gardens do. My suffering came from my resistance to reality, not from reality itself. Hana thought about this for days. It sounded too simple, too passive. Surely a good gardener should be more in control, should fight harder, should make things happen through sheer will and effort. That's what she had always believed. That's what she had been taught. Work harder. Try harder. Never give up. Never accept less than what you want. But that spring, exhausted from years of fighting, she tried Yuki's approach. She planted her usual crops, but she watched without quite so much attachment. She made plans, but held them lightly, like holding water in open palms rather than clenched fists. When the early spring rains were heavy, she didn't curse the rain for making the ground too wet to work. Instead, she noticed which areas of her garden drained poorly and which held water. She moved some plants from soggy areas to drier spots. She planted water-loving things where puddles formed. She worked with what the rain was teaching her instead of fighting against it. When a patch of unexpected shade appeared from a neighbor's growing tree, she didn't rage at the tree or insist her sun-loving plants should adapt. She moved her tomatoes and peppers to sunnier spots and put shade-tolerant greens where the shadow fell. She adapted her garden to reality instead of demanding reality adapt to her plans. When beetles arrived on her beans, a whole swarm of them appearing overnight, she didn't fight them with anger or take it as a personal attack. She covered some plants with cloth to protect them. She accepted the loss of others, handpicking beetles, but not trying to save every single plant. She planted more seeds to replace what was lost. She worked with what was happening instead of raging against it or seeing it as failure. The season brought many challenges. Every season does. Weather swings, pests, disease, plants that didn't thrive for mysterious reasons. When her tomatoes ripened late because of a cool summer, she didn't mourn the earliness she had wanted. She didn't compare them to an imagined perfect harvest. She appreciated the ripeness she had when it came. When her squash grew smaller than expected due to poor pollination, she didn't curse the lack of bees or see it as her failure. She valued what actually grew, what was actually there, instead of what she wished was there. Something fundamental changed in her relationship with gardening. The garden was still work, still required effort and attention and skill. But it wasn't battle anymore. It wasn't war. It was dance. She led sometimes, using her knowledge and experience, making decisions, taking action. The garden led sometimes, showing her what it needed, what was possible in these particular conditions, in this particular season, in this particular year, with this particular weather and this particular soil. She began to enjoy the surprises, unexpected volunteers from seeds dropped by birds, happy accidents that her rigid planning would never have allowed. By holding her plans lightly, by staying open to what actually happened instead of attached to what she thought should happen, she discovered possibilities she hadn't imagined. The harvest was modest that year, not her best in terms of quantity, but she enjoyed it more than any harvest before. Not because it was perfect, but because she was at peace with what it was. She had stopped fighting with reality and started working with it. Stopped demanding and started accepting. Stopped trying to force and started allowing. Yuki visited near the end of the season. She looked at Hana's garden, at the mix of abundant and struggling plants, at the adaptations Hana had made, at the peace on Hana's face. She smiled knowingly. "You've learned the river's teaching," Yuki said. "What do you mean?" Hana asked, though she thought she understood. "Water doesn't make the riverbed fit its plan. It doesn't demand the stones move out of its way. It fits itself to the riverbed, flows where it can flow, finds the path that's available. This is what you're doing now. Flowing with your garden instead of demanding it flow with you. Working with reality instead of fighting against it." Hana nodded. She understood completely now. Zen Buddhism wasn't about giving up or not caring or becoming passive. It was about intelligent, skillful engagement with reality as it is. Working creatively and effectively with what's actually here instead of exhausting yourself demanding what isn't. The following years, her garden taught her more and more lessons. Some seasons were generous with rain and Sunday. Some were stingy. Some brought unexpected abundance. Some brought unexpected loss. Disease 1 year. Abundant pests another year. Perfect conditions another year. But she met them all the same way now. With presence, with adaptation, with willingness to work with what came rather than fighting for what didn't. She noticed this wisdom applying far beyond her garden. When her children didn't behave as she planned, when they made choices she wouldn't have chosen, she could adapt instead of battling. She could work with who they actually were instead of demanding they be who she thought they should be. When her aging body couldn't do what it once did, when she couldn't work as long or lift as much, she could accept new limitations instead of raging against time. She could find new ways to work instead of mourning old ways. When life brought changes she didn't choose, illness or loss or unexpected challenges, she could flow with them instead of breaking against them. This is what Zen Buddhism teaches about acceptance and flow. Not passive resignation. Not giving up, caring or trying. But wise engagement with reality as it is, not as we wish it were. Working with the current instead of against it. Bending instead of breaking. Adapting instead of resisting. As you rest tonight, you can practice this same flowing acceptance. Your body wants to relax in its own way, at its own pace. You don't need to force it. You can work with it, flowing with what wants to happen rather than demanding a different experience. Your breath has its own rhythm tonight. Sometimes deep, sometimes shallow. Sometimes steady, sometimes irregular. You don't need to control it or perfect it. You can flow with it, accepting each breath as it comes. In this flowing acceptance, there's a deep peace. Not the peace of everything being perfect, but the peace of being in right relationship with reality, dancing with it instead of battling it, working with the current instead of against it. Zen Buddhism speaks often about emptiness. Not emptiness as lack or loss, but emptiness as space. Room to breathe. Room to move. Room to be. We fill our lives so full that there's no space left. Full schedules. Full minds. Full houses. And in all this fullness, we lose something essential. We lose the space where peace can exist. Think of a cup. A cup's usefulness comes from its emptiness, the hollow space inside. If you fill a cup to the brim and keep trying to pour more in, it overflows. Nothing more can be received. The cup becomes useless for its purpose. But a cup with space can receive, can hold, can serve its function. Our lives are like this. When we fill every moment with activity, every space with possessions, every silence with noise, we become like an overflowing cup. Nothing new can enter. Nothing can be truly experienced. We're too full to receive anything more. A hermit named Aisai lived alone in a small hut deep in the mountains, far from any village. The climb to reach him took half a day of steep, difficult walking. People who knew of him wondered how he could be happy with so little, so isolated, so removed from the world. His hut was barely large enough to lie down in, just a simple shelter with a door and a window. He owned only 3 robes, one for each season. 1 bowl for food. 1 cup for tea. A sleeping mat. A small cushion for sitting. Nothing more. No books. No decorations. No possessions beyond the absolute necessities. A wealthy merchant named Goro heard about this hermit and was curious in the way wealthy people sometimes become curious about those who have nothing. How could someone with so little be content? Didn't he want more? Didn't he feel deprived, lonely, bored? Didn't he regret his choices? Goro decided to visit and see for himself. Perhaps to offer charity. Perhaps to satisfy his curiosity. Perhaps to confirm his own belief that wealth and possessions were necessary for happiness. The climb to Aisai's hut took half a day of hard walking. The path was steep and rough, barely a path at all in some places. Goro was not used to such exertion. He lived in a comfortable house in the city, traveled by sedan chair, employed servants for physical labor. By the time he finally arrived at the small clearing where Aisai's hut stood, he was sweating profusely and gasping for breath. His fine clothes were dusty and torn in places from branches. He found Aisai sitting on a smooth stone outside his tiny hut, looking out over the valley far below. The view was breathtaking. Mountains stretched into the distance, layer after layer fading to blue and purple. A river wound through the valley like a silver thread. Birds wheeled in the sky. Clouds drifted below them. The hermit sat perfectly still, not reading, not working, not doing anything. Just sitting, just looking, just being. "May I rest here?" Goro asked, his voice rough from exertion and thirst. "Of course," Aisai said, his voice gentle and warm. "Please, sit. Be welcome." He gestured to another smooth stone nearby, positioned to share the same view. Goro sat gratefully, catching his breath. His eyes took in the hermit's simple dwelling. The walls were bare unpainted wood. The door hung slightly crooked. Through the open doorway, he could see inside. Bare floor. A rolled sleeping mat in one corner. One small shelf with the bowl and cup. That was all. No furniture, no decorations, no comforts of any kind. It made him uncomfortable. How could anyone live like this? It seemed more like a prison than a home. "You have so little," Goro said after he had caught his breath. "Aren't you lonely up here? Don't you want more? I'm a wealthy man. I could help you. I could send you furniture, books to pass the time, good clothes, better food supplies. You don't have to live like this. Don't you feel you're missing out on life? Don't you regret giving up the world?" Asai smiled gently, a smile that held no judgment, only patience. "What am I missing?" Goro gestured vaguely, struggling to put it into words. "Everything. Comfort, beauty, possessions, the pleasures of life. Good food, soft beds, warm rooms, entertainment. The company of others. Culture. Society. You live like you have nothing. Like a man who has lost everything." "I have everything I need," Isai said. "Look." He gestured to the vista before them, the sweep of mountains and sky and distant river. "I have this view. I wake every morning to it. I watch the sun rise over those eastern peaks. I watch it set behind those western ones. I see the seasons change across these mountains. Snow in winter, green in spring, colors in autumn. Do you have this view in your city? Can you see this from your house?" "Well, no, but," Goro admitted. "I have silence," Izai continued, holding up a hand to forestall interruption. "Listen. Can you hear it? Just wind moving through trees, birds calling to each other, the distant sound of water, the sound of my own breath. This silence that's not empty but full of the world's natural sounds. Do you have this silence in your crowded house? In your noisy city?" Goro listened. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard such pure, peaceful silence. His house was always noisy with activity. Servants moving about, talking, working. Family members calling out, chattering, arguing, laughing. The sounds of the city outside his windows, people shouting, carts rumbling, dogs barking. Even at night, there was noise. The house creaking, people snoring, sounds from the street. He couldn't remember the last time he'd experienced true silence. "I have space," Isai continued. "My hut is small, but it's never cluttered. I can find anything I need instantly because I have so few things. My life is simple, but it's never crowded. My days are open, not crammed with obligations and schedules. My mind is unburdened because I don't have to track and maintain and worry about countless possessions, countless responsibilities, countless things that need attention. Tell me honestly, how many things do you own?" Goro thought about his large house in the city. 3 floors, dozens of rooms. Each room full of furniture, decorations, possessions. Chests full of clothes he never wore. Rooms he never entered. Objects he had forgotten he owned. He honestly didn't know how many things filled his house. Thousands probably. Maybe tens of thousands. The number was overwhelming when he tried to think about it. "Many," he admitted, his voice smaller. "More than I can count." "And how many of those things do you actually use? How many bring you real joy? How many do you even remember you have?" Goro was silent, Most of his possessions he rarely used or thought about. Many he had forgotten about entirely until a servant moved them or cleaned them. They filled his house like water fills a cup, taking up space, demanding attention for cleaning and maintenance and organization, but bringing little actual value or joy. When had he last felt joy from any particular possession? He couldn't remember. "I have time," Asai went on, his voice gentle but penetrating. "My days are simple and spacious. I wake with the Sunday. I sit in meditation, just being present. I tend my small garden, just a few vegetables and herbs. I prepare simple food, just enough for my needs. I sit again. I walk in these mountains. I watch the sunset paint the sky. I sleep when darkness comes. I'm not rushing between obligations. I'm not managing complexity. I'm not maintaining things that don't matter. I'm not trying to be more than I am or have more than I need. My life has space in it. Room to breathe. Room to be present. Room to experience each moment fully instead of rushing through it to get to the next thing on my list." He looked at Goro with deep compassion, no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. "You asked what I'm missing. But I wonder what you're missing. You have so much that perhaps you have no room left for what actually matters. Your cup is so full that nothing more can enter. No new experiences, no simple joys, no peace. When was the last time you sat in silence just to sit? When did you last have a day with nothing scheduled, nowhere you had to be, nothing you had to do? When did you last feel spacious inside instead of crowded and rushed and constantly behind?" Goro realized he couldn't remember. His life was packed completely full. Every hour scheduled with meetings, obligations, social events. Every room filled with things. Every moment occupied with activity or worry about activity. He had been living with a constant sense of pressure, of fullness, of never having enough time or space or peace or rest. He had thought he needed more. More wealth, more possessions, more success, more everything. But maybe what he actually needed was less. Maybe he needed space. Maybe he needed emptiness. "I feel suffocated," Goro admitted suddenly, surprising himself with the honesty. "I have everything, but I feel like I can't breathe." Isai nodded with understanding. This is what happens when we have no space. We suffocate. We drown. Not from lack, but from too much. Not from poverty, but from excess. "But how do you not get bored?" Goro asked. "How do you fill your days? What do you do?" "I don't fill them," Isai said simply. "I let them be spacious. I let them unfold naturally. I'm not bored because I'm present with what is. Boredom comes from wanting something other than what's here. When you're fully present, each moment is full enough. Simple things become interesting. A bird song. Light changing on the mountains. The taste of plain rice. Breath moving in and out. These things are enough when you have space to experience them fully." He paused, then added, "You can stay here for a few days if you wish. Experience this for yourself. See if spaciousness suits you better than fullness." Goro stayed for 3 days, though it felt longer without the usual markers of time. Isai's life was astonishingly simple. Wake with the sun when light first touched the mountains. sit in meditation, facing the east, breathing, just being present with the morning. Work in the small garden, pulling a few weeds, watering a few plants. Prepare one simple meal, rice and vegetables, prepared and eaten slowly with full attention. More sitting, walking through the forest with no destination, watching the sky change as day moved toward evening, clouds forming and dissolving, colors shifting. Then sleep when darkness came and stars emerged. There was so much space in this life. Space between activities. Space in the schedule. Space in the mind without constant entertainment or distraction. And in that space, Goro felt something he hadn't felt in years, maybe hadn't felt since he was a child. Peace. Actual rest. The ability to simply be without doing, without managing, without tracking countless things and obligations and concerns and responsibilities. His mind resisted at first, uncomfortable with so much emptiness. It kept wanting to fill the space. To think about business, to plan, to worry, to entertain itself with memories or fantasies. But gradually, as the hours passed without any demand for activity, his mind began to settle. Thoughts came less frequently. The constant mental chatter quieted. Space opened up inside him that matched the space in Asai's simple life. On his last morning, as he prepared to descend the mountain and return to his crowded life, Goro thanked Asai with genuine feeling. "You've shown me something important," he said. "I thought you were poor, that you had given up everything and lost your life. But you're rich in ways I'm not. You have space. You have peace. You have freedom. You have room to breathe. I have none of these things, despite all my wealth." "You can have these things too," Asai said. "Not by running away to a mountain or giving up your family or abandoning your responsibilities, but by emptying your cup, by creating space in your life. By choosing less so you can have more of what actually matters. You don't need to own nothing like I do, but maybe you need to own less. Maybe you need space in your days. Maybe you need room to breathe." Goro returned home different, though his family didn't notice at first. But gradually, they saw changes. He began to make space in his life. He cleared out possessions he didn't use, giving away or selling things that just filled space without bringing value or joy. He created empty rooms in his house where there had been clutter, places where you could just sit without being surrounded by things. He cleared time in his schedule where there had been constant activity. Days where nothing was planned. Hours where he just sat in his garden, watching clouds, listening to birds, breathing. His family thought he was strange at first. Lazy, maybe, or sick. Why create empty rooms when you had money to fill them? Why have days with nothing planned when there was always something that could be done? But gradually, very gradually, they felt the difference. The house felt calmer, less crowded, easier to breathe in. Life felt less rushed, less pressured. There was room to breathe, room to be, room to actually live, instead of just managing constant fullness. His children played more freely in the empty spaces. His wife sat with him in comfortable silence, something they hadn't shared in years. He learned to sit in silence where there had been constant noise. To have empty space where there had been constant activity. To let his mind rest where there had been constant thinking. And in that spaciousness, that emptiness that wasn't lack but freedom, he found something he'd been seeking all along through accumulation. peace, rest, room to breathe, the ability to simply be. This moment doesn't need to be filled with doing or achieving or becoming. It can just be space, open, available, empty in the most peaceful way, like a cup waiting to receive, like a room cleared of clutter, like a schedule with nothing written in it. In this spaciousness, in this emptiness, there's a deep rest. Not the rest of exhaustion, but the rest of having room to breathe, room to be, room to exist without pressure or fullness or constant demand. Let yourself be empty. Let there be space. This is not lacking anything. This is having everything that matters. The wisdom Zen Buddhism offers tonight is about connection. Not the connection we usually think about, the surface connections of shared interests or activity, but something deeper. The understanding that we're not as separate as we seem. That beneath all our differences, beneath all the boundaries we draw between self and other, there's something shared. When we see this, compassion arises naturally, not as something we have to force or practice or work at, but as a natural response to recognizing ourselves in others, recognizing the same struggles, the same hopes, the same fundamental humanity. There was a monk named Dogen who lived in a monastery built into a mountainside, where one of his assigned duties was to care for the monastery's garden. He took this responsibility very seriously, perhaps too seriously. He tended the vegetables and flowers with careful attention, knowing that the monastery depended on this garden for food through the winter months. Every morning before meditation, he would walk through the garden, checking each plant, pulling weeds, adjusting stakes, ensuring everything was growing as it should. But there was another monk, Shinichi, whose task was to maintain the meditation hall where all the monks practiced twice daily. And Shinichi was careless. At least, that's what Dogen thought. Shinichi would leave doors open, letting in cold wind that chilled the hall and disturbed meditation. He would forget to light lamps in the evening, leaving the hall dark and unwelcoming for evening practice. He would track mud across the clean floors that Dogen had just swept. He would forget to replace cushions after cleaning them, leaving practitioners without proper seats. Dogen found himself growing angrier at Shinichi with each passing day. Every day brought some new carelessness. Every day, more work created by Shinichi's thoughtlessness and lack of attention. Dogen would complain about him to other monks during work periods, would avoid sitting near him during meals, unable to stand even looking at him, would feel his jaw tighten and his hands clench whenever Shinichi walked by, barely able to contain his frustration. How can someone be so careless? He would mutter to anyone who would listen. How can he not see what he's doing wrong? How can he be so disrespectful of the meditation hall, of all of us who practice there? The other monks would mostly nod and say nothing. Some agreed with Dogen. Others seemed less bothered. But Dogen's anger grew like a weed in his own garden, taking root, spreading, choking out any compassion he might have felt. One winter evening, Dogen was working late in the garden, covering young plants against an expected frost that the old monk said would come that night. The work was cold and difficult. His hands were numb despite the cloth he wrapped them in. His back ached from bending. His breath made white clouds in the dark air. But the plants needed protection, and this was his responsibility. He wouldn't fail the way Shinichi failed. As he worked, he looked up toward the monastery buildings and saw light still burning in the meditation hall. Shinichi had forgotten again to extinguish the lamps before leaving after evening meditation. Waste of precious oil. Dangerous too, leaving flames unattended. The hall was old wood. One stray spark and everything could burn. That was it. Dogen had had enough. He threw down the cloth he was using to cover plants and stormed toward the hall, his anger finally boiling over. He was going to confront Shinichi. Going to finally tell him what a careless, irresponsible, terrible monk he was. Going to demand he do better or ask the abbot to assign someone else to the hall. Someone who actually cared. But when he reached the hall and slid open the door, ready with all his angry words, he found Shinichi sitting alone in the dim lamplight. He wasn't preparing for meditation or cleaning or doing any task. He was just sitting on the meditation platform, his back to the door, his shoulders shaking. He was crying. Not quiet tears, but the kind of crying that comes from deep grief, from a pain too large to hold inside. Dogen stopped in the doorway, his anger suddenly uncertain, thrown off balance. He didn't know what to do. Should he leave? Should he speak? His prepared angry words seemed suddenly wrong for this moment. "What's wrong?" he finally asked, his voice harder than he meant it to be, still carrying the edge of his frustration, even though the situation had changed. Shinichi looked up, quickly wiping his eyes with his sleeve, trying to compose himself. "I'm sorry. I know I left the lamps burning again. I know I'm always forgetting things. I know I'm a terrible monk. You don't need to tell me. I already know. Why do you forget so much?" Dogen asked, his anger deflating but not gone, replaced by frustration and confusion. "Why can't you just pay attention? Why can't you just do your duties properly? It's not that hard. We all have responsibilities." "My mother is dying," Shinichi said quietly, his voice breaking on the words. "In the village, 3 days' walk from here. I received word this morning from my brother. She's been sick for months, but now it's the end. Days, maybe. A week at most. But I can't go to her. The abbot needs me here. We're short-staffed with Brother Gento away. My duty is here. So I stay. But my mind is with her constantly, every moment. I try to focus on my tasks, but all I can think about is her alone, in pain, dying without me there. I should be there. I should be holding her hand. Instead, I'm here, failing at simple tasks, useless to everyone." He looked down at his hands, tears dripping onto them. "I know this is no excuse. I know I should be able to keep my mind on my duties regardless of what's happening in my personal life. That's what being a monk means. But I keep forgetting things. I walk into a room and forget completely why I came. I start a task and halfway through, I forget what I'm doing. My mind is divided. Half here, half there with my mother. And neither half working well. I'm failing everyone. Failing you. Failing the community. Failing my mother because I'm not with her. Failing myself." Dogen stood very still, his anger completely gone now, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. Shame, maybe. Recognition. Memory. He thought of his own mother, who had died when he was just 14, before he entered the monastery. How he would have given anything, absolutely anything, to be with her at the end. But she had died suddenly while he was away, and he never got to say goodbye. How the grief had made everything difficult for months, for years even. How he had forgotten things constantly. How he had failed at simple tasks. How he had moved through his days like a ghost, physically present but mentally far away, lost in grief and regret. He walked slowly to the meditation platform and sat down beside Shinichi, his cold, dirty hands resting on his knees. "I didn't know," he said simply, the words feeling inadequate. "I've been angry at you for weeks. Furious. I thought you were careless because you didn't care. Because you were lazy or disrespectful. I never asked why. I just judged you." "I am careless," Shinichi said. "You're right to be angry. I'm failing at my duties. The hall has been poorly maintained. I know this. You're not wrong to be frustrated." "You're human," Dogen said quietly. "You're trying to do your duties while carrying grief that would break most people. This is hard. This would make anyone forget things." "I know because," he paused, the words difficult. "When my mother was dying, I was already at the monastery. A young novice. I didn't get to see her at the end either. She died while I was here, doing my duties, being a good monk. For years, I was angry about that. Furious at myself, at the abbot who wouldn't let me go, at the rules that kept me here. I felt I had failed her as a son, failed myself as a person. I couldn't concentrate on anything for a long time. I would forget what I was supposed to be doing. Other monks thought I was lazy or distracted. No one knew I was carrying that grief, that guilt, that constant ache of not being there when she needed me most." Shinichi looked at him with surprise, really seeing him for the first time. "You seemed so together, so focused, like nothing bothered you, like you had everything figured out." "Everyone carries something," Dogen said. "We just don't always see it. We walk past each other every day and we see what we want to see, what we expect to see. I saw carelessness in you. I saw disrespect. I saw someone failing. But I didn't see grief. I didn't see a son trying to do his duty while his heart is breaking. I didn't see you trying your best while carrying a burden that would crush most people. I only saw what annoyed me. I didn't see you." Something shifted between them in that moment. The anger Dogen had been carrying dissolved. In its place was understanding, compassion, recognition of shared pain, shared struggle, shared humanity. "I'll help you," Dogen said. "I'll check the lamps at night. I'll remind you of tasks. Not because you're failing, but because we can help each other. Because I understand now what you're carrying." Over the following weeks, Dogen watched for Shinichi, helped him remember things, covered for him when his grief made simple tasks difficult. And Shinichi, when he could, helped Dogen in the garden, working silently beside him, both of them carrying their losses, both of them doing their best. When Shinichi's mother finally died and he returned from her funeral, he found the meditation hall perfectly maintained. Other monks had covered his duties, understanding now what he had been going through. No one had judged him. They had simply helped. "This is Zen Buddhism," the abbot told Dogen later. "Seeing through our own anger and judgment to the person beneath. Recognizing our shared struggles. Offering compassion not because we should, but because we understand. We're all carrying something. We're all doing our best. When we remember this, compassion becomes natural. Dogen never forgot that lesson. When he encountered difficulty in others, he learned to ask himself what they might be carrying that he couldn't see. What grief, what fear, what struggle might be making things hard for them? This question changed everything. Anger dissolved into understanding. Judgment softened into compassion. This teaching about seeing our shared humanity lives at the heart of Zen Buddhism. We're so quick to judge, to criticize, to grow angry at others for their failures. But we rarely know what they're carrying. What invisible burdens make their lives difficult? What struggles they face that we can't see? When we remember that everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about, compassion becomes easier. Not forced, not performed, but natural. A simple recognition of shared humanity, shared difficulty, shared struggle to do our best in an often challenging world. In another village, there was a woman named Yori who ran a small shop selling rice and vegetables at a crossroads where two main roads met. Her shop sat in a wooden building her father had built, and she had inherited the business when he died. Most of her customers were local farmers and villagers she had known all her life, pleasant people who would chat while she measured out their purchases, asking about her children, sharing news from their farms. But there was one man, a traveling merchant named Kenta, who came through every few weeks on his route between larger towns. He made her life difficult every single time. He would arrive at her shop with a scowl already on his face. He would complain loudly about her prices, claiming every other shop charged less. He would examine every grain of rice as if looking for flaws, holding it up to the light, sniffing it, rolling it between his fingers. He would poke at her vegetables, muttering about how they were too wilted, too small, not fresh enough. He would compare her unfavorably to other shops he visited, implying she was cheating him, that her goods were inferior, that only necessity forced him to stop at her inadequate establishment. He never smiled, never offered a kind word or a pleasant greeting, never seemed satisfied with anything she offered. Just criticism and complaints, and a general air of dissatisfaction with everything in his miserable life, but especially with her and her shop. Yori had come to dread his visits. She would see him approaching from far down the road, recognizable by his distinctive limp and his merchant's pack, and would feel her stomach tighten with anxiety. She would take a deep breath and prepare herself for the unpleasantness that was coming. The complaints, the criticisms, the way he made her feel small and inadequate, the way he ruined what was usually a pleasant day of work. She complained about him constantly, to her husband over evening meals, to her neighbors when they came to her shop, to anyone who would listen, really. That awful merchant. That miserable, critical, impossible man. Why did he have to stop at her shop? Why couldn't he go somewhere else? Why couldn't he find some other shopkeeper to torment? Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. She imagined him getting lost on the road, finding another route. Anything that would mean she didn't have to deal with him anymore. Her husband would listen patiently to her complaints. Maybe he's just unhappy, he would suggest. Maybe something in his life is difficult. I don't care what his excuse is, Yori would reply. He has no right to treat me the way he does. He could at least be civil. One day in early autumn, Kenta came to her shop limping even worse than usual. His face was grey with pain, drawn tight, with deep lines around his mouth and eyes. But still he complained. Still, he examined her rice critically. Still, he muttered about her prices being too high. Nothing satisfied him. Nothing ever satisfied him. Yuri felt her irritation rising as usual. But something was different today. Maybe she was just tired of being angry. Maybe something had shifted in her. She found herself really looking at him for the first time, seeing past her own frustration to the actual person standing in front of her. "Why are you limping so badly today?" she finally asked. The question came out sharper than she intended, more from irritation than genuine concern. "Are you hurt?" "Old injury," Kenta said shortly, his voice clipped with pain. "Broken leg that healed wrong years ago. Hurts more as I get older. Especially when I walk long distances. Which is every day, in my work." "How long have you been walking today?" she asked, and this time there was real curiosity in her voice, not just irritation. "Since before dawn," he said, shifting his weight carefully from one foot to the other. "I have deliveries to make in the next town before evening. A merchant doesn't have the luxury of resting just because something hurts. The work doesn't stop. The customers don't care about my leg." Yuri looked at him differently then, really looked at him. She saw the pain lines around his eyes, deep grooves that spoke of years of chronic discomfort. The way he shifted his weight constantly off the bad leg, never standing still, never able to find a comfortable position. The tightness in his jaw, the way he held his whole body rigid as if bracing against constant pain. The grayness of his face, the exhaustion. He had been walking since before dawn on a leg that clearly hurt with every step. Hours of walking already, with more hours still ahead of him. Making deliveries because that was his work, his livelihood, his responsibility. Continuing despite pain that was obviously considerable. And she had been thinking only of how he inconvenienced her, how his complaints annoyed her, how his presence disturbed her pleasant day. "Sit," she said suddenly, gesturing to a stool she kept behind her counter for herself. "Please, rest while I prepare your order." "I don't need to sit," he said automatically, but she could see the longing in his eyes as he looked at the stool, the way his body wanted to agree, even as his pride refused. "Sit anyway," she said more firmly. "The rice won't complain about waiting a few minutes. And honestly, watching you stand there in pain is making me uncomfortable. Please, sit." He hesitated, then slowly, carefully lowered himself onto the stool. The relief that washed over his face was immediate and unmistakable. He closed his eyes for a moment, just breathing, just being off that leg. His whole body sagged as the tension released. Just sitting clearly helped immensely. As Yuri measured out his rice, moving more slowly than necessary to give him more time to rest, she found herself wondering about this man she had judged so harshly for so long. He walked in pain every day. Probably had been for years, judging by how old the injury was. And he still did his work, still made his deliveries, still traveled these hard roads because that was what he had to do to survive. How much harder must everything be when you're in constant pain? How much shorter must your patience be when every step hurts? How much easier to be critical, to complain, to find fault with everything when your own body is a constant source of suffering? Maybe his complaints weren't really about her rice or her prices or her vegetables. Maybe they were about pain that never stopped. About a life that was harder than it looked from outside. About carrying a burden every single day that no one else could see or understand. "The rice is fresh this week," she said, more gently than she had ever spoken to him before. Good harvest from the northern fields. The quality is better than usual, and I'll throw in some extra vegetables. These greens are getting old. Better you use them than they go to waste here. He opened his eyes and looked at her with genuine surprise. She had never offered him anything extra before, had never spoken kindly to him, had always been brisk and efficient, clearly wanting him gone as quickly as possible. "Why?" he asked, suspicion and confusion mixed in his voice. "Why are you being kind to me? You've never liked me. I know that. Everyone knows that. Because your leg hurts and you've been walking since dawn and you still have hours more to walk," she said simply. "Because maybe I've been too quick to judge you. Because I've been seeing your complaints but not seeing your pain. Because we all carry things that others don't see. And maybe if I was in constant pain, I'd complain too." Something changed in his face as she said this. The hardness softened a little. The permanent scowl eased. His eyes became less guarded, more human. "You're the first person who's noticed," he said quietly. "The pain, I mean. Most people just think I'm an angry old man, a difficult customer, someone to avoid, if possible. No one asks why. No one looks past the surface to see what I'm dealing with." "Maybe you are an angry old man," Yori said with a slight smile, surprising herself. "But maybe you have good reason to be. Pain makes everything harder, makes everything feel worse, makes it difficult to be kind when you're suffering." He nodded slowly, and she thought she saw something like relief in his face. To be seen, to be understood, even a little. To have someone acknowledge what he carried instead of just judging the way he acted. After that day, Kenta still stopped at her shop every few weeks on his route. He still examined the rice carefully because that was his job, to ensure quality for his customers. But the edge of complaint was gone from his voice. The constant criticism stopped. And sometimes, when his leg hurt especially badly, he would sit on her stool for a few minutes while she prepared his order, and they would talk a little. Not much, but enough. Enough to see each other as people rather than obstacles. Enough to recognize shared humanity beneath their different circumstances. He told her once about the accident that had broken his leg. A fall from a loaded cart 20 years ago. The bone had healed crooked because there was no doctor nearby who could set it properly, and he couldn't afford to stop working long enough for proper healing. So it healed wrong, and he'd been walking on it wrong ever since. 20 years of every step hurting. 20 years of pushing through pain to do his work because he had a family to feed, responsibilities to meet. She told him about her own struggles. Her father's death that left her with the shop, but also with debts she was still paying off. Her youngest child who was sick often, requiring medicine they could barely afford. The constant worry about making ends meet. The pressure of trying to be fair with prices while also keeping the shop profitable enough to survive. They weren't so different, she realized. Both doing their best with difficult circumstances. Both carrying burdens that others couldn't see. Both trying to get through their days with some dignity intact. One day, months after their relationship had changed, when Yori was struggling to move a heavy barrel of rice from the storage room, Kenta helped her despite his leg. He limped over without being asked, took one end of the barrel and helped her shift it where it needed to go. "You don't have to help," she said. "I know your leg hurts." You were kind to me, he said simply. When you didn't have to be. When most people aren't. When I probably didn't deserve it. That meant something. Still means something. She understood then what a small act of compassion could do. How seeing someone struggle, acknowledging their pain, offering a moment of kindness could change everything between two people. Could transform an enemy into something like a friend. Could replace judgment with understanding. Years later, when Yuri's own daughter was old enough to help in the shop, Yuri told her this story as a lesson about how to treat difficult customers, about Zen Buddhism's teaching on compassion. We see the surface, she explained to her daughter as they worked together measuring rice. We see the complaints, the criticism, the difficult behavior, the anger. But we don't see what's underneath. The pain, the struggle, the reasons people are the way they are. That man seemed like he was just a difficult, angry person. But underneath was someone in constant pain, trying to do his work despite suffering, getting no sympathy or understanding from anyone. She paused in her measuring, looking at her daughter seriously. When we look deeper, when we ask ourselves what someone might be carrying that we can't see, compassion becomes possible. Even easy. We're all just people trying to get through our days, some of us carrying more than others, all of us doing the best we can with what we have. When you remember that, when you really understand it, it changes how you see everyone. Even the difficult ones. Especially the difficult ones. These stories show us something important about how we can live together. We're so quick to judge based on behavior we see. But behavior is just the surface. Underneath, there's always a person with a story, with struggles, with reasons for being the way they are. When we remember this, when we look for the humanity beneath the behavior, something shifts. Anger dissolves into understanding. Judgment softens into compassion. We begin to see that we're not so different from each other. We all struggle. We all carry burdens. We all have days when we fail at simple things. We all need patience and understanding and kindness. This recognition of our shared humanity is what Zen Buddhism calls compassion. Not pity. Not looking down on others, but looking across at them. Seeing ourselves reflected in their struggles. Recognizing that their difficulties could be ours. That our difficulties could be theirs. That we're all in this together, all doing our best, all deserving of understanding. As you rest here tonight, you can bring this same compassion to yourself. You've carried things today, struggled with things, done your best even when your best felt inadequate. You're human, imperfect, doing what you can with what you have. This is enough. This is always enough. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to be human, struggling and trying and caring just like everyone else. And in recognizing your own struggle, you might find it easier to recognize the struggles of others, to offer the understanding you wish others would offer you, to see beneath the surface of difficult behavior to the person underneath who is probably doing their best with whatever they're carrying. The teachings rest with you now. Not as new knowledge to carry, but as reminders of what you've always known. That peace is your true nature. That stillness is always available. That you can rest in the midst of everything, finding the quiet center that has always been here. May your rest tonight be deep and complete. May you wake refreshed, carrying these gentle insights lightly, letting them support you without weighing you down. May you remember, even if only faintly, that peace is always as close as this breath, this moment, this simple presence. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk. Tonight, we will journey together through ancient tales of wisdom and peace. These are stories passed down through generations of Zen masters who discovered profound truths in the simplest moments of life. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. As we begin this journey together, know that this wisdom is not difficult or complicated. It speaks to something you already recognize deep within yourself. You don't need to remember every detail or grasp every meaning. These stories work best when received with an open, relaxed mind. Feel free to let your body settle completely into rest. Allow your breathing to find its own gentle rhythm. There's nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to understand. Tonight, you are just a traveler on an ancient